when you get into a contract standoff and your response to that is to have a triple crown season, I really feel like Jamar Chase is coming for a number that starts with 4. Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast. I am your host, Dave Helman, and I finally felt comfortable enough putting down my phone, looking away from the constant updates to record a new episode of the show for y'all. First episode, not of the league year, of the legal tampering window. The NFL opened for business. We'll call it unofficially on Monday afternoon, as teams are allowed to negotiate with free agents. I guess it's fair to point out some of this can change. Things can't be signed. Things can't be finalized with the league office until Wednesday. But we got our first taste of the flurry of free agency news early on Monday, and it went all day, as you might expect, with plenty of big news. It's a lot to get into. Don't even want to waste time with a big intro because who the heck knows what could change while I'm doing that. So let's just jump in to the meat of the show. My buddy, Greg Auman of foxsports.com, was gracious enough to join me to recap a busy first day. We saw the big quarterback domino fall. Sam Darnold signed with a new team. Maybe you heard there was a big trade, the Washington Commanders acquiring a left tackle. Plenty of other stuff to get into. So let's just do it. Greg Auman joined me to recap day one of this legal tampering window. Check it out. All right, Greg, we were just joking about it, but the nice thing about being in LA, and I am setting myself up for failure so badly here, but we're recording at the end of the day LA time, which hopefully means the vast majority of the business has gotten done for at least the beginning of this tampering period, of this free agency period. So it felt like a good time to check in with you. For starters, I mean, you're on the East Coast, so things got going bright and early for you. How did this live up to your expectations overall?
Yeah, fun day, busy day. Kind of had the weird Twitter outage in the middle of everything. So like our best means of finding out information in real time kind of disappeared. Went over to Blue Sky for a couple of minutes. That was a treat. But no, it's one of those where, noon, everybody's excited about noon. We joke about the legal tampering period and how quickly things take shape. But within an hour, you've got just dozens and dozens of big impact moves all over the league. It was neat to see. It starts out with, you had that list of 100 free agents you're working off of, and how many of them are already moved. I think 20 guys had already kind of come off the market before the day begins. And then there's just as many that are gone, 2.5 hours in. So just a busy day, and it's for NFL teams, it's like Christmas because so much, just a lot of presents being opened all over the league.
I legitimately enjoyed the reports early during that Twitter outage about how clueless teams felt, because it's so true. If you didn't already know this, I promise you, your favorite team, they are lurking on Twitter. If it's not like the GM and the coach themselves, they've got guys who have burners who are keeping up with all of this. So it was very funny watching the NFL react to not having that like one-stop shop to see everything happening.
Yeah, and it's one of those where there's not a lot of substitutes for it right now. So you're trying to check this website. What if someone broke news like just on their website? What would that be like? Let's go check that. And luckily, it was kind of a slow hour, I guess, if you will, while it happened. I think the Chris Godwin news broke in the middle of all that. So there certainly moves that happened, but luckily it kind of got back up and running before things got too crazy.
Yeah, ironically, for a brief window, watching TV was probably the best way to get up to the date news, which, like, when was the last time you really felt like that was the case? All right. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. There's news flying all day. There's more movement than we could possibly hope to encapsulate in one brief podcast. But I did want to go over the biggest notes of the day with you, the stuff that really stood out to us in terms of shaping the landscape for the coming year. And it feels like a cop-out to focus on a quarterback first, but when you have a guy that was, pushing for the number one seed in the NFC, a guy who underwent a career renaissance like Sam Darnold, signs a $100 million contract with the Seattle Seahawks. I think that is a fair place to start this thing off, with the quarterback domino going. I guess it technically started on Friday night with Geno Smith getting dealt to Las Vegas for a third-round pick. But very quickly, Seattle answered all of those questions the way a lot of us thought they might. They bring in Sam Darnold, a 3-year, $100 million deal, which just feels like the latest evolution of the Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield contract.
Right. I really felt like they got the Baker contract. That's almost to the dollar what Mayfield got, with Tampa when he got his second deal with Tampa. It's one of those where, there's no middle class for NFL quarterbacks. So it seems like so often we're stuck in either $50 million a year or rookie contracts. So Sam Darnold was another guy that kind of fit into that range, like you said, of Geno, of Baker Mayfield. Had a good season that didn't end great, and he has a new home now. So the dominoes that always matter the most, the ones that reach out to the biggest fans, are going to be your quarterbacks. And like you said, Geno got it started. Now you have Darnold that goes to Seattle. You have Justin Fields goes to the Jets. We don't know where Aaron Rodgers goes, but those will probably be of the lingering stories that are left. I think what people would be most interested is where these quarterbacks go. Are there quarterbacks like Russell Wilson that might not even have a starting job to go to?
Which I do want to get into the dominoes here. We'll definitely talk about what this means for Aaron Rodgers. We can talk about Russell Wilson. Worth throwing out there as well, Justin Fields did sign with the New York Jets pretty early on Monday, 2 years, $40 million, I believe. But going back to Darnold specifically and Geno Smith, I'm curious for your take on this, because I think Geno Smith is a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. But Sam Darnold is 7 years younger. And if we are to believe the reports that Geno Smith was seeking $40 to $45 million over his next deal, and we'll see what he gets. I would imagine an extension is coming eventually with the Raiders after a trade. We'll see what he ultimately gets. But basically, it seems like the Seahawks said, even if you are better right now, Sam Darnold is cheaper and younger and potentially has a longer pathway to get us where we want to be. We'll roll with him, even if right now it's a little bit of a downgrade. Do you agree with my assessment of that? Because I view it as a little bit of a gamble to roll with maybe a lesser quarterback, but again, one that gives you a longer time to build a contender around him.
Right. What it felt like to me is that with Seattle, just in terms of rebranding with a new coach, the post Pete Carroll world, it's almost like because Pete Carroll is in Vegas now, to rebrand, you almost have to let him have the spare parts of what used to be the Seahawks. So Geno is gone now. You're going to have a new quarterback. It's easier to think of this as a new start in a new franchise with Mike McDonald with a new quarterback. DK Metcalf isn't there now. Maybe you had to do that. Maybe you had to actively move on from some things to reset yourself as a team, as a franchise. I don't know that if you ask me right now, who's going to have a better season, who's going to throw for more touchdowns, Geno Smith in Vegas or Sam Darnold, I'd probably take Geno right now, honestly. Maybe Seattle adds another weapon that gives him a better group to throw to, but it's not necessarily in it. Like you said, the biggest thing is the image, is the idea that you're getting a guy on the rise and not a guy on the decline. You got 7 years younger. Not a whole lot different financially. It's not like you're going to change your franchise with a third-round draft pick you get for Geno Smith. But I do think if you're trying to actively change the identity of your franchise, moving on from quarterback is almost as big as moving on from coach.
I'll do the Seahawks the favor, too, of saying there's still plenty of time in free agency. There's a lot of players still available. You have the entire draft to work at. And they did get an extra third-round pick. Doesn't seem like great compensation for a starting quarterback, but they got a third-round pick. They have time to improve the offense around Sam Darnold, but I am worried about getting similar returns to what we saw last year. Think of the infrastructure that was around Sam in Minnesota, whether you want to talk about the receivers. They had TJ Hawkinson, the offensive line, much better. This is a Seattle offensive line that has been a problem for what feels like forever at this point. Not just DK Metcalf is gone now. He's traded off to Pittsburgh, but Tyler Lockett was cut over the weekend as well. So Seattle's reshaping this thing in the span of a few days. And I feel like they got a lot of work to do if they want Sam Darnold to return that investment. Because I think the world of Jackson Smith and Jigba, but other than that, I don't really see it right now.
Right, absolutely. And you think about just the coaching to go from Kevin O'Connell, one of the better quarterback coaches, offensive minds in the league, to a defensive head coach in Seattle, and Clint Kubiak as a young, unproven coordinator. I think, again, I think you'll see Seattle have an offensive-minded draft now. I think they'll lean on adding the weapons to replenish what was depleted in these deals and these cuts. But yeah, like you said, it's hard to get behind Seattle. You think about that division right now, they'll do well not to be, not to be at the bottom of that division. You think about Arizona probably being on the same level. You certainly think about the Rams being ahead. You think about the Niners kind of getting back to who they want to be if they're healthier. That's a tough division to make up ground in. And if you're McDonald, you want to make sure you don't take too big a step back in year two either.
So that was the first domino and then the biggest domino. We knew Darnold was going to get the biggest quarterback contract in this cycle, but it does set up a very interesting game of musical chairs with some of the other big teams that potentially need a quarterback. Obviously, the Vikings have JJ McCarthy, but you would assume they'd like to have a veteran, whether that's Daniel Jones or somebody else. The Pittsburgh Steelers not only traded for DK Metcalf, but they gave him $150 million over 5 years. You would think they would really like to have a quarterback to throw him the ball. And obviously, the New York Giants have been linked to every capable quarterback in the NFL over the last month or two. So let's start with the obvious one, because the biggest name, the most capable name left among them, got to be Aaron Rodgers. And I can squint and see a vision for all of these teams, but I'm not really sure where this goes from here. What do you think?
It's tough, man. And most of these fan bases, it seems strange to think about, but if you tell them, hey, man, Aaron Rodgers is coming, they're grimacing, they're wincing. There's not necessarily an excitement that comes with that there would have been maybe 2 years and an MVP ago. Yeah, I mean, it could be Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has set the bar so low for what they need from their quarterbacks. Got a little bit better briefly last year. I do think whoever takes over in Pittsburgh, like you said, is going to have what looks like 2 receivers to throw to, which is really more than they've had in some time. Metcalf is probably the guy they've been wanting to get and trying to get multiple years. I know it goes back to AB probably in terms of them having an A-list target to go to. But no, I don't know. There's not an obvious landing spot where you're like, oh, that makes sense. Again, Giants stay in New York, but I don't know if that'll go over well there. Giants fans probably won't be happy.
Would it go over well with Aaron Rodgers? I mean,
right. Oh no.
We know you can turn things around quickly in the NFL, but of these 3 teams, the Giants do seem the furthest away from true postseason relevance.
Oh no, absolutely. And for him, again, we kind of saw this with Favre. I mean, Favre at least got to the playoffs, but you don't want to. I think everybody saw, what Brady did in Tampa as such a great model for what your second chapter, your late finish with another team can be. That's not what Aaron Rodgers had with the Jets. And chances are it's not going to be what he has with his next team. And it's so hard when you've had one legacy with one franchise for so long to end it and kind of have a weird footnote on your career, which is what this very well might be. He could surprise us. He could be back and click with another team. But there's not a lot of obvious, wow, that'll work out. That'll be a great fit. That makes sense for both sides. Matches for him right now.
I selfishly really want it to be the Vikings for the content of it all. Like the parallels to Favre would be hilarious. Like for him to wind up in Minnesota. Also, the infrastructure there could do wonders for him. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he was bad last year in a situation that wasn't great. So put him there with the weapons that they have and a better offensive line, a younger offensive line. Kevin O'Connell has done wonders for Sam Darnold as well as a few other guys. I think that would be phenomenal. I also think the Vikings are too smart to do it. I can't imagine why they would want to bring that into their situation with JJ McCarthy. I don't necessarily buy it. And I go back to the Steelers. Like, why do you do that trade, Greg? Why do you bring DK Metcalf onto your team if you don't have a pathway to capable quarterback play in 2025? People talk about the Giants as being desperate, but the Steelers feel like they should be desperate because what did we do this for otherwise?
Right. Absolutely. And if you don't, again, Metcalf George Pickens, not two guys that are going to take well to another year of bad quarterback play and not getting the throws they want and the balls they want between them. So no, and the tricky thing too is that Rodgers isn't necessarily that seasoned veteran that is a great role model and you want to put with your rookie quarterback to teach him the ways and all those kind of things. He complicates a team more than he simplifies a team for sure. And I don't know if that's what Minnesota wants. As a team that, I think they probably felt like they were right there, whatever, 13 wins, didn't end things well, but we're right there in the conversation with Detroit with 2 weeks left in the season and have most of that back. So, you'd like to think that Aaron Rodgers goes into the season with a default of being as good as Sam Darnold, but that's tough to live up to. I mean, Darnold played statistically really well out of nowhere last year. So the Vikings have to decide, do you roll the dice with someone completely unproven in a rookie who's never had a pass, or a second-year guy who's never had a pass, or someone who's 41 years old or whatever and on the other end of their career?
I just can't quit the idea of Aaron Rodgers unlocking the fountain of youth one more time. I should have given it up a long time ago, but if I could get one more season of him doing his Aaron Rodgers thing, I think it's worth it. It feels like it would have to be Minnesota or Pittsburgh. I guess we'll see if that comes to fruition. I can't say I feel great about Aaron Rodgers in a Giants uniform, at least in terms of being anything other than an unmitigated disaster, but we'll see. We'll see how it ages. That's where things stand with the quarterback. Like I said, Justin Fields, he looks like he's going to be in line to at least get the first crack at the starting job with the New York Jets. Daniel Jones is still out there as well. Not going to command like this crazy salary, but I would imagine that's a domino that needs to fall. Maybe he goes back to Minnesota. We'll see how that goes. The next thing I wanted to get into with you, it's actually not even technically a free agent signing, but in terms of, again, if we're just looking at the biggest things shaping the league landscape, I thought one of the other big things that happened on Monday was the Washington Commanders trading for a franchise left tackle. Midway through the day, it kind of hit a lull and it felt like a lot of the biggest stuff had happened. And then out of nowhere, Washington trades this year's 3rd round pick and 7th round pick, as well as next year's 2nd round pick and 4th round pick in exchange for Laremy Tunsil, as well as Houston's 4th round pick in this year's draft. So a lot of moving parts here, but the upshot is the Commanders need a franchise left tackle. They need to upgrade their offensive line. Clearly, especially after Ronnie Stanley re-signed in Baltimore, didn't look like that was going to be there for them on the open market. I mean, you saw Dan Moore get a huge deal from the Tennessee Titans on Monday. Jalen Moore also got a huge deal with Kansas City. So short of very much overpaying on the open market, this was the pathway to getting a great left tackle. And I feel like the Commanders nailed it, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where, I mean, it's the spare parts add up to about a 1st round pick that they gave up to get him. Teams have done that with Tunsil before, but I mean, as a proven commodity, as somebody they'll probably now have to pay just to keep and have in Washington. He and Deebo Samuel, that's 2 big additions you make. Had to give up some picks to get him, obviously. But no, for Washington, I think there's very much a putting your chips to the middle of the table, realizing that they can build on what they did last year and probably need to keep up with, again, in their own division, the Super Bowl champs. So for what they've done to surround the promise of a young team last year and maybe build on that, it's been impressive.
Yeah, you mentioned also last week they trade a 5th for Deebo Samuel as well. So you get a number 2 receiver to go behind Terry McLaurin. You also get a franchise tackle. And people will say not Tunsil's best season last year. That's totally fair. I still think he is a definitive upgrade over your other options. Not to mention you're picking 29th in the draft thanks to that run to the NFC Championship game. So again, you look at the free agent class, you look at where you're picking thanks to your surprising success. I think it's a no-brainer, even with what they gave up. I looked this up, Greg. The Commanders still have 6 picks in this year's draft. They still have their 1st round pick. They don't have to give up their 2nd until next year. So they'll still have solid resources in the draft, in addition to adding 2 immediate contributors, 2 immediate starters. And oh, by the way, they bring back Zach Ertz and Bobby Wagner over the weekend as well. So I'm not saying they get back to the NFC title game, but it feels like the Commanders are doing what they need to do to maintain that momentum for sure.
Oh, sure. They've kept their key pieces. They've kept their veteran pieces too, if you will. They got a little bit older in this, which, you think about wanting to add experience, wanting to add wisdom to your youth. They've done that. I mean, I don't think they've lost that much. They lost Jeremy Chin today. I'm trying to think of other free agents. De'Ami Brown went to the Jaguars. They lost him as well. So they've lost some pieces. It's not like they're back intact, but I think they've made themselves a more maybe a steadier team, a more veteran team. And then you think about just what Jaden Daniels does to build in year two. It's exciting. They'll have high expectations around that team.
One thing I did think was weird, the decision to cut Jonathan Allen due to cap constraints,
Right.
which, hey, that happens. Then they turned around and signed Javon Kinlaw to a 3-year, $45 million deal, which, I mean, you have as much cap space as the Commanders do. Maybe it doesn't matter, but I thought that was a little bit strange. I think I would have kept Jonathan Allen on his current deal rather than do all of that. But like I said, when you've got $80 million in cap space, who's counting, right?
Yeah, Kinlaw. I mean, that in terms of the overpays of the day, that's top 5 for sure. That's a number that immediately was seen by everybody as more than they probably needed to pay to get him. And especially if you had Allen, you had a guy in place, it wasn't like it's a big cost saving. I think it's probably a net $3 million saved by going from a known commodity and a guy who's been on your front line for whatever, 7 years to, again, guy that's bounced around and you don't know what you'll have there.
I will say Washington general manager Adam Peters he was from San Francisco where Kinlaw was originally drafted. So maybe there's some familiarity there, but that would make more sense to me if Kinlaw had had a better career to this point. And he's not a bad player, but yeah, if you're looking for head scratching decisions, I definitely think that's one that people are going to talk a lot about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, again, like you said, did it seem necessary? I mean, if you're trying to change things out, that's fine. Maybe he'll surprise people. I mean, like you said, Peters probably knows him better than most, at least 30 of the GMs in this league. But yeah, it did seem like swapping things out with not a lot of to show for it.
Can I hit you with my favorite irony from this Laremy Tunsil situation?
Yes.
Hey, Washington is a young team with a ton of upside. Of course, you're going to strike while the iron is hot, and Jaden Daniels looks like he could be the best quarterback in the NFC in the near future. The funny thing to me is that they traded with Houston, who was in this very same position a year ago. CJ Stroud makes a run to the divisional round. Hey, we're pushing our chips in. We're bringing in Stephon Diggs. We're going to go get Danielle Hunter. We're gearing up to really go after a Super Bowl while CJ Stroud is still cheap. And a year later, they're trading the only good piece of their offensive line away, which I got to imagine CJ Stroud sitting there after getting hit to hell and back last year saying, what are we doing, guys? I thought our chips were in. I thought we were the young team pushing for a Super Bowl. And it's just a very funny example of how quickly life moves in the NFL because the shine feels like it's completely off of Houston's apple. And now it's on to another team with another young quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. It does that quickly. And I'm sure Houston has something that they haven't done yet that'll counter this move, if you will. But no, I mean, you think about Houston, as much as they stumbled during the year, had a really big playoff win and looked like a team that would be close again. So, like you said, there's other pieces they brought in that won't be back. Diggs is probably not part of that team moving forward. There's other things that'll change. But yeah, it's weird to go kind of, you don't want to say buyers and sellers like baseball trade deadline, but that's a big piece that you're trading off. And your biggest return for trading away your starting left tackle is a 2026 second round draft pick. You're not even going to get to, take a guy next month where you get a return on it right away. It's the slow play, the long play, I guess, for Houston, but sometimes those are the toughest ones to sell.
Long plays are not fun when you have a short window to maximize a cheap quarterback. And I mean, the Texans, they don't have to pay Stroud tomorrow. They could wait 2 or 3 more years to do that, but you want to be pushing while the quarterback is not accounting for 13, 14, 15% of your salary cap. And yeah, to your point, they're a playoff team as well. It's not like they have this crazy first round pick that they can use on the badass left tackle in this year's draft class. So It's early. There's time to address this stuff, but it is starting to get hard to see how Houston definitively upgrades their offense from the unit last year that was not good enough.
Yeah, and changed OCs too. That's the other thing to remember is that as part of that whole boy life can change in a year thing, Bobby Slowick is interviewing for head coaching jobs, and a year later he's not even an OC in Houston. So I think you'll see probably more change on that side of the ball around CJ Stroud, from the coaching to the line in front of him. Um, Personnel wise, they'll make changes as well. It's interesting because as well as things worked, and as much as Houston seemed like a team that seemed to have stability and long term 10-win a season type plan in place, there's a lot more change that's happened around the quarterback here in the last year for sure.
With all due respect to a ton of guys that signed deals on Monday, I think one of the other biggest dominoes in the league right now is a deal that happened on Sunday morning. And that was the blockbuster extension that Myles Garrett got. You know, he was hell bent on getting out of Cleveland. He wanted a trade. And then I wake up on Sunday, and when you're talking about a 4-year, $160 million extension with $123.5 million guaranteed, $40 million per year, if you're as bad at math as I am, all of a sudden I understand why Myles Garrett was okay retying his future to the Cleveland Browns.
Well, and it's like you had such a complete reversal where there was such not even a lack of progress, but drama, where it's like, the team owner isn't going to meet with him, and all things are bad, and he's making it clear in the media he's not going to come back at any price at all, and then actually that price worked, and he signed, and there you have it. And it's like when Max Crosby signed, my whole thing was like, that's awesome. He's the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. It's like, how long is that going to be the case? Does he get a week with that honor? And he got 3 days. And even now, like we're saying, I mean, as you get excited about Myles Garrett, completely unprecedented, $40 million a year. We're just wondering which guy's going to trump him and prices right him to $1 more in the next week, 2 weeks.
You set it up perfectly, because I do think that's what makes this so interesting. I mean, it's big news that the best edge rusher in the world is staying in Cleveland, and it makes the Browns a more viable team for the future and right now. But I don't think it's pertinent for that specifically. It's because of the effect that this is going to have on so many other teams. And the first one that springs to mind is the Cincinnati Bengals, who within the last 3 weeks, de facto GM Duke Tobin said he wants to make Jamar Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. Do you think when he said that, he knew that the price was going to jump up to $40 million by the beginning of March?
I think he has to go back and just be like, I want him to be the highest paid non-quarterback in early March 2025. Not now, not the current record, but when I said it, what would have been the most then? Because, for him, for anybody else, you think about Micah Parsons and what his starting price is, it's not just random numbers, man. They want to know they're getting more than anybody else. And it used to be, if all you had to do was say non-quarterback, wasn't much of a conversation. But now this could be 4 different guys in one off season that can boast they're the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. And that's going to take it up to whatever. One guy gets $41 million a year. The next guy gets $42 million a year. And as amazing and indispensable these players are, eventually that gets really costly.
I do want to talk about Micah, but the Bengals are doubly interesting. Again, I mean, this Jamar thing's been going on since last summer. He saw CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson set the top of that market. And, if he had a regular great season for a receiver, maybe this is less of an issue. But when you get into a contract standoff and your response to that is to have a triple crown season, I really feel like Jamar Chase is coming for a number that starts with 4. Yeah. And then, by the way, Trey Hendrickson has already requested a trade. The Bengals are already exploring that. I doubt Trey Hendrickson expects to jump over Myles Garrett, but after leading the league in sacks, I guarantee you he wants to be close. He wants that deal to look like it's in the same neighborhood as Crosby and Myles Garrett at the very least. So what do the Bengals do here? I mean, they've already seemed like they're backed into a corner, and this just highlights it even more. Like, I I am morbidly curious to see how they go about handling any of this, because based on what we've seen so far, I don't think they're equipped to do it, to be blunt.
No, well, and I think they know that they don't want to pay Trey Henderson that kind of money, which is why he's been floated first subtly and then completely not subtly as a trade guy, as someone that, hey, if you can get a second round pick for him, as good as he's been, if he gets $30 million a year, it's a huge investment. Even though he led the league in sacks, don't get me wrong, production has been there. Cincinnati had to go in this offseason knowing they had to radically improve their defense. And it's hard to do that when the first thing you do is take away an NFL sack leader. I think there'll be a ton of change on that defense in Cincinnati. A lot of subtraction, a lot of new faces. You're going to have 6, 7 new starters, a new coordinator, and Al Golden. But no, they had to figure out the finances of keeping at least one of those elite superstars. Like you said, if I would think if you go right now to Chase and you give him $1 more than Myles Garrett, you guarantee $1 million more than Myles Garrett. You go 4 years, $161 million. You hope that gets it done. And if it doesn't, you're just waiting for Parsons to get a deal and then reset your minimum again.
Well, if it's any consolation to them, I do think the Bengals, if they're waiting on Micah Parsons, the Bengals probably just bought themselves some time. Because
True.
look, Greg, going back to the combine in Indy, there was all this smoke and all this talk about the Cowboys might actually get to the table with Micah faster than we thought. They've had conversations. They might be close. Myles Garrett getting this deal erases any confidence that I have that a Micah Parsons deal is coming before training camp, because that is the Cowboys' track record. And when a guy wants to set the market, they're usually not in a hurry to get it done. So whatever optimism I had that this was coming in the spring, and of course I could be wrong, but it doesn't give me good vibes for a quick resolution to this Micah Parsons situation.
If you're just greedy, as Dallas goes, in that we already know, we recorded late enough that we can report that Javonte Williams is signed with Dallas on a 1-year deal, as much as $3.5 million. They went ahead and I saw they locked up the long snapper as well. So that's done. That's out of the way.
You hear that, Cowboy fans? What else do you want? You got the long snapper. You got a new running back. What else do you want? You want them to get a deal done with the best pass rusher 26 and under in the NFL ahead of time? Who do you think you are, expecting the Cowboys to do business with their all pros ahead of time?
He said selectively aggressive, and I think what he meant was aggressively selective is what he was going to be this offseason. I think that's what it was.
I'm stealing that for the next time I do a Cowboys show.
Definitely.
Or what. I think at this point, if you expected different from the Cowboys, I think you have nobody to blame but yourself. They watched Jordan Lewis leave to Jacksonville early on Monday. Again, if I'm wrong, I will admit it to anybody that wants to listen, but this Myles Garrett deal doesn't give me confidence that there's a resolution coming with Micah anytime soon. This is the playbook from the Dallas Cowboys, which is scrape the bottom of that barrel in free agency and draw these contract negotiations out as long as you can. And shame on me if I ever believed that this would be different and that Micah might sign before we got to the summer months, because that just doesn't happen.
Check before the pod's over. You just check your phone, kind of look down, and no, still nothing. Okay, that's fine.
I'll be checking my phone until July or August if I had to guess. We'll see. One last thing, a lot of stuff did happen. Again, we can't encapsulate all of it. There must have been 100 transactions over the course of Monday, but I did just want to get your opinion, maybe a vibe check, if there's a signing or a team or a strategy that really stood out to you on this first day. In terms of, I don't like the phrase winners and losers, because there's no way to accurately know this stuff right now. But if there's somebody who you just enjoyed what they did, or you thought they made some smart decisions, who would you say?
Yeah, it's always tricky because, you have teams that literally have $100 million more to spend than other teams. So the Patriots, again, did really well in spending a lot of money. If you want to spend a lot of money in free agency, that's what they did. The Jaguars, the Panthers, all really active. If I had to pick one team, and it's not necessarily what they did today, but what they've done here in the last like 4 days, it's the Bears. I think Chicago's done really well. It was neat in that a week ago, Ben Johnson said, you don't hear this often, but he said that they wanted to do what Carolina did. And in getting Bryce Young for his second year, they wanted to improve the interior offensive line, the front of the pocket, and how they protected him, because obviously that was a huge issue in Chicago, and you knew it had to be something that was a priority for them. But to see what they've done now, to trade draft picks for Joe Tooney, to trade draft picks to get Jonah Jackson, veteran proven guards. We saw with Aaron Banks that guards made some crazy money today. So neither of those are necessarily super expensive deals. They gave up later round picks to get, and then to go get Drew Dahlman today and add what was easily the best center of the draft or of the free agent class. That's three really good interior linemen that will remake that offensive line in one fell swoop. Spent a lot of money to get Grady Jarrett today. Got Odangbo as a pass rusher. So I felt like Chicago's done well. I think, put a lot of money into the trenches. If you're trying to get people excited about things getting better, new coach, young quarterback, putting money into your lines is probably a smart thing to do.
I think the Bears are a perfect example of two things being true at once. Like, objectively, they overpaid for at least a couple of these guys. Like maybe Grady Jarrett at his age and the length of time he's been in the league, maybe that's a little bit of an overpay. I know Dowman is a guy that a lot of people were like, hey, this is just a case of him being the best center available. But at the same time, I think it's okay to overpay for good line play. Like, you see it every year. It's the biggest cliche in football for a reason. If you're good on the lines, your team's probably going to be pretty good. So if your offensive line can run the ball and protect Caleb Williams, and now you have added bodies on your defensive front, you make life easier on Montez Sweat and Gervon Dexter as well. I love this, even knowing that they probably overpaid. I love this. I mean, Ben Johnson obviously came from Detroit. You got 3 first-round picks on your offensive line. Like, wouldn't you love to do it for cheaper than that? Sure. But if your offensive line kicks ass, who cares?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It was one of those where if he's trying to make Chicago more like Detroit, that's one way to start. It's not gonna confuse people with Detroit right away, but I think in terms of them getting better, them helping Caleb Williams out, so he's not running for his life, so he has time to take advantage of the rest of the offense. That's what they've done. And again, spent more, but when you have a rookie quarterback, that's what allows you. They have a window here of 2 or 3 years where they can overpay on the line on other positions because they're not having to pay Caleb Williams $55 million a year. That will go away in whatever 3-4 years here.
It's not doing anything to change my opinion that Ben Johnson would love to draft Ashton Genty either, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's what if you think about adding to that offense, you think about what the infusion of an elite running back does for an offense. We saw it with Philadelphia. It's again, nobody's going to be Barkley in their first year, but Genty's exciting to see. Again, whether it's Dallas at 12, whether it's Chicago at 10, it seems like good fits. And you think about changing an offense and getting people excited, that will do that. To add Caleb Williams and Ashton Genty in back-to-back years, that's really strong as offensive weapons in this fantasy football world we live in. That should have people excited.
I think a lot of people are, especially maybe, if you're a Packers fan or a Vikings fan, maybe you're going to roll your eyes and say, here go the Bears again, off-season champions for the 10th year in a row. But and yes, they do have to, it has to translate to the field, but I think this is a great way to get it to translate to the field. You build the lines, you make that as favorable a situation as possible for your young quarterback. It makes perfect sense with where Ben Johnson is coming from. I think you're absolutely right. I think when people talk about the team that they're most excited about what they did in this cycle, I think the Bears will be at the top of everybody's list.
And like you said, nobody wants to go crazy and just spend like crazy in free agency. But I do think if you're going to allow it, you do it with a first-year coach who's trying to bring out, take out the old and bring in new and set an identity. And you see that, again, Vrabel in New England spending like crazy on a defense. You see Jacksonville and Liam Cohen bringing in 9 players today None of them really that expensive, but again, these new coaches want to make it their team as soon as possible because there's not a lot of patience in the league. And if you wait for year 2 to really set who you are, you might not make it to year 2. So I get that. It's not necessarily the way you want to do it. You want to draft, you want to build young. They don't have time to do that some of the time.
Two teams that I really enjoyed their activity on Monday. I'll start with the LA Rams. I love them making their strong points stronger. I'll start with the big one. Obviously, they signed Devontae Adams on Sunday. He was cut by the Jets, so they didn't have to wait for the tampering period. He gets 2 years, $46 million. If you're going to lose Cooper Kupp, I love this being the way you respond to it. I know Adams is 32. I know last year was a disaster with the Jets, but he still had 1,000-yard season, and at least on 4 or 5 occasions still looked like that guy. So you make him the X receiver in the Rams offense. I say pretty firmly he's the number 2 wide receiver behind Puka Nacua at this point in their careers. I think he could really thrive there. Perfect way to enhance the fact that you're bringing Matthew Stafford back. And then the other one, not a sexy signing at all, but Poona Ford signing for 3 years, $30 million to just sort of be the boring space eater on a defensive line full of guys that get sacks. I mean, you have Jared Verse, you have Braden Fisk, Kobe Turner, Byron Young. Those guys get your sacks. If Poona Ford is stopping the run and eating blocks for everybody else, I think that makes an already fantastic defensive line even better. And Poona doesn't even have to move. He was in Thousand Oaks, or he was in El Segundo with the Chargers, and now he just gets to move up to Thousand Oaks with the Rams. I think it's a win-win for everybody. I love both of these moves for them.
No, absolutely. And for the Rams, it's neat. I mean, the Rams had such a push with such a rookie-driven defense last year that to add a veteran presence, to add somebody that's done it for a long time, it makes sense. You know, the Rams, you go back, whatever, week and a half, and it's like, you know, the Rams losing Stafford, the Rams losing Kupp. They were in danger of really losing their identity almost in terms of the names we knew and associated with all the success with McVay. But now, I mean, again, Stafford's back, and you've armed him with a motivated Devontae Adams, who, when he's had good quarterbacks to throw to, is a double-digit touchdown guy every year. So, you know, the idea of him getting back, like you said, not even a good end in Vegas, not what you want with Aaron Rodgers in New York, to get him back to being a dominant Pro Bowl level player. He and Puka are a great 1-2 punch, and that's a team now. NFC West, I think, is just going to be an absolute brawl this coming year in terms of we saw the NFC North have a 13-win wild card or whatever it was, and I think the NFC West could be really much the same this year.
I think that's a great point. Obviously, the two Norths, AFC and NFC North, are going to get a lot of hype, but that is a stacked division for sure. The other team, and I promise I'm not just saying this because you're on with me, but I loved what your local team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, did on Monday, and I would never, ever accuse them of getting an early jump on their negotiations. But man, it seemed like both of the Bucks' big deals were done within like 5 minutes of the tampering window opening on Monday afternoon. But yeah, I mean, Todd Bowles hasn't had a real deal edge rusher since probably 2021.
Yeah.
And he gets Hassan Reddick for 1 year, $12 million. It's very reasonable money for a guy who was a Pro Bowler just 2 seasons ago. And then you bring back Chris Godwin, which it's funny. If somebody else had signed Chris Godwin, I would have been like, oh, I don't know about this 29-year-old receiver coming off a second major injury. How's he going to change to a new scheme, new surroundings? But you re-sign in Tampa for a very team-friendly deal. I'm a big fan. Like, the familiarity's there with the players, with the coaches. The training staff knows him. They know, you know, how he can work through his recovery, what he needs to do to get ready for the season. You keep him there with what's already on Tampa's offense. I love that deal for everybody involved. So 2 big moves on both sides of the ball for Tampa that I really, really liked.
Yeah, and 2 different moves. And the Godwin is very much their priority in Tampa for so long has just been keeping their own, keeping the band together, keeping the core intact. There's so much Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as a person, as a player, 2 guys that have spent their entire careers with one team, which is so rare for even the best receivers in this league. Really neat to see. There was a window where you kind of wondered if the Patriots or another team that had a ton of cap space and not a lot of money, there wasn't a whole lot of high-end receiver in this free agent group. So you wondered if someone would just throw a crazy number at Chris Godwin and give him 27 a year or more than that a year. And it's hard to picture Chris Godwin playing for another team, but it seemed possible. And what they did, I mean, he guaranteed 2 years for a guy coming back from a dislocated ankle, is a show of faith in him and his ability to get healthy again. He did this last time he was a free agent. It's coming off an ACL tear, and they got 3 years and $60 million from the Bucks. So I think they both know each other well. What you said about Hassan Reddick is absolutely true. I mean, they did not get the presence and the sacks and the pressure from the edge that they needed last year. It meant that they were blitzing like crazy, more than even Todd Bowles wants to. So I think he talked this past month a little bit about just wanting to be able to get there with 4. If you think about what the Eagles did to be able to get there with 4 and not have to blitz and to get pressure and be able to drop the rest back, that's not something the Bucs have done well. Reddick is coming off of a lost year. I mean, a holdout and then 1 sack in 10 games with the Jets. But I think he has a chance to reset himself and get back to the guy that had 50.5 sacks over 4 years from 20 to 23. They want turnovers. They want takeaways in Tampa. You go back to 22 when the Eagles made the Super Bowl. Reddick had 16 sacks. Reddick had 5 forced fumbles. He was a catalyst on that defense, and that's what they need to be. That's what they need him to be this coming year in Tampa.
And you know what? Even if he's not, and it's entirely possible that he's washed. I understand that. But even if he is, who cares? $12 million. I think it's 14 total with 12 of it guaranteed. That's like fringe top 20 money at this point. This is not a big spend in terms of edge rushing talent. So best case scenario, he taps back into that defensive player of the year candidate form from a couple years ago, and the Buccaneers defense is completely changed, right? I mean, if he's getting favorable matchups because of Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey in the middle, the sky's the limit. And if his best days are behind him and this is a forgettable signing, it changes nothing about the Bucs' long-term outlook. So I think it's fantastic. Buy low, potentially sell high. And yeah, I think from the Chris Godwin, the loyalty, the emotional standpoint of it, definitely very cool. Somebody needs to study the way Jason Light makes this happen, because Levante David, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin all just refuse to leave Tampa, which is so much easier said than done to pull that off with multiple players.
Right, especially if you've won a championship too. It's one of those where it's easy. There's some guys that just want to go get paid. They've already got a ring. And these guys like to be here. I mean, part of the reason they've had the stability they've had is that, Todd Bowles, you think about the coaching staff he's had, they want to be in Tampa. This team has become a really homegrown team. Not a whole lot of free agents. Obviously, Baker Mayfield is a free agent, is a newcomer. But on neither side of the ball, you have a lot of guys that were free agent finds or gems. This is, for the most part, a team that came up in Tampa. For Mike Evans, he's been here since 14. For Levante David, he's been here since 2012. Chris Godwin since 2017. They've all been here through multiple coaches and long years. So now that they have kind of this sustained success where they've been to the playoffs 5 years in a row, they've won the division 4 years in a row, you understand why they want to be a part of that and continue that if they can.
Like I said, something other teams should study, because there are plenty of other teams that don't have that much success retaining their own. See how it goes for Tampa. I feel bad. I feel like we've hardly scratched the surface, but I am going to let you go, Greg. I know it's a busy week, and that's the best part is we got plenty more coming. We'll have plenty more to talk about as we move into the second and third waves of free agency, but I appreciate it, man. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Dave. Always a good time.
This episode of the NFL on Fox podcast is brought to you by Daiya Pizza, featuring dairy-free cheese made with the innovative Daiya Oat Cream Blend. Let's talk about game day snacks. Pizza is a must, but if you've ever doubted that a dairy-free option could match up, Daiya is here to change your mind. Thanks to their Daiya Oat Cream Blend, you can get all the creamy, melty goodness that stretches and melts just like dairy, with a rich, savory taste that perfectly complements every bite, without any of the dairy. Their thin, crispy crust is the foundation for bold, savory toppings, and the standout? Their cheese, made with Daiya Oat Cream Blend. It's rich, stretchy, and melts just like dairy cheese.
So whether you're hosting a big watch party or keeping it low-key with family, Daiya makes it easy to enjoy dairy-free eating while delivering everything you love about pizza. No commitment to dairy-free eating is required. Daiya pizzas are designed for everyone to enjoy. Make your next pizza night or game day spread FOMO-free. That's fear of missing dairy. Visit DaiyaFoods.com to learn more, or grab Daiya Pizza at major retailers like Whole Foods, Kroger, or Walmart. Check them out on Instagram or TikTok for even more inspiration.
Thanks again to Greg Auman for hopping on. You can go check out his and everybody else's great writing over at foxsports.com or the Fox Sports app. Up to grade analysis, information about everything happening during this free agency cycle. I'm sure plenty of it dated already because the news just keeps coming. Make sure you are dialed in as we stay on top of everything in this free agency window. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. If you're not, go find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We will be back Thursday with whatever is to come. I'm not even going to guess at what it is, but I know we will have plenty to talk about as the league year officially begins. Doesn't even open until Wednesday, by the way, but that's just the nature of the beast. We get the ball rolling quickly and early, and I love it. There's no other way to say it. It's one of the most fun weeks of the year as we set the stage for the 2025 season. I think that just about covers everything. Like I said, we will be back Thursday. Make sure you go find us. We're on YouTube too, if you'd rather watch than listen. However you prefer to do it, we will see you there on Thursday. As always, I appreciate it, and I will talk to you all real soon.